What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video today, and as you can tell, the qualities might be a little bit different because I bought a new camera to test out. So not doing a big job today, pretty much doing an oil change on the old girl and basically just giving her a little bit of cleanup. Anyways, not much of an introduction, but we'll get started. We'll get the car jacked up and then we got to get the oil. So we got to go down to Repco and pick up some oil and a filter, and then we can show you how it is done, because oil change is pretty easy and there's not really much to it. You have the right tools, it's pretty simple. Yeah, we'll get started and get straight into it. Alright, so I'm back from all the auto stores that I visited because they didn't have the oil filter. So I had to do an extra trip to another store, Auto Pro, and I got some rear rotors, rear brake pads, oil and oil filter. So I've got the rear rotors, brand new oil, and pads and oil filter. So that's all ready to go. What we'll do first is do the oil change. That's the most important. So we'll have to take off the bash plates first. Then we get to the oil and open up the top oil filler, and then we can start draining it. So once you've got the tub underneath your car, you can then drain your oil. So you just undo that screw that looks like this. Once you've done that, it will drain out. Once it's finished draining, which that's about finished draining, pop the screw back in. So just straight back in there. And once that's all tightened up, just wipe that up. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that now. And then we have to change the oil filter, which is right there. Pretty easy to get to. We'll get to that next, so I'm just going to tighten the oil filter. Once your old oil filter is completely off, get the new oil filter. So you'll have like a plastic cover on top of it. Take off the plastic cover. So take that off. Don't want to put that straight on. What you want to do is you want to get some oil, old oil, just get it on your finger. So basically just a little bit of oil, smear it around onto like the rubber O-ring. It literally does not have to be much. Once you smear it around the O-ring, then you can screw it back on. This kind of oil filter only needs to be done hand tight. Just like as tight as you can with your hand. It doesn't need to be, this is just for removing it, otherwise it's just hand tight. This is exactly how I do it. It even says on the labeling here to only do a hand tight. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that on now. So remove the old one, let that drain, and pop the new one on, and then start filling it up with oil. So it's pretty easy. Alright, so the next step of this whole process is to fill it up with oil. Now I've gone to the trusty internet, which is always very accurate, jokes, and it says 7.5 to 8 litres for 3.2 diesel, which mine is a 2010 NT, so I think it's the same for all of them. I assume the 3.2, the 4M41 engine, so about 7.5 to 8 litres. I've got a 7 litre drum, but I've also got some left over in the house, so I'm going to use all of this, check the dipstick, and then fill it up with a little bit more just to top it up. But what we're going to do is fill it up, get it to the point where on the dipstick it says maximum, let it settle, start the car, let it run for about a minute, stop the car, let it sit, and check it again and see if we need to top it up, because, well, you never know, like it just doesn't always work the way you want it to do. So once that's done, we'll get started on the brakes. Alrighty, I've checked my dipstick, which is just there. It's about halfway between the maximum fill and the bottom fill line. So I'm gonna put in a little bit more because I've just put in 7 litres of that stuff. So that's a pretty good oil to use on your Pajero diesel. I find it to be pretty quiet and just lasts a good amount of time. So I'm gonna put in about half a litre more, which is about 7.5 litres in total. Remember, there's not gonna be you're not gonna be able to fully drain every single drop of oil that's in your car, but you'll be able to get out a fair bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and go inside the house, get my oil, which is a bit of leftover from my last time that I serviced it, and I'll just put in like about half a litre, and then we'll check it again, and then we'll start the car and make sure that it's quite quiet and doing the job that it's supposed to do. So now the next thing to do is, once you've done your oil change, once you're pretty happy with it, check your cluster. Make sure that you know exactly how many Ks you've done. So mine's 240, 138. And on the oil canister container that you get, you put that down. So product used 10W40. Date, I typically put the actual date of the service done and the kilometers that the service was just done at, and then cross out the next service. So just so people know that when this was serviced last, it just feels like it's much easier to know, instead of next service, you don't know when the service was actually done. So I'm gonna go ahead and write that down now, and then I'll take off the sticker and put it on the windshield. All right, so now that the oil change is done, we can get started on the rear brake pads and rotors. So this will be probably a little bit of a longer job. I've never changed the pads or the rotors on this car, and I've had the car for over 2 years. So yeah, they're probably gonna be pretty rooted. So we'll find out, we'll take off the wheel and we'll inspect it closer. I know the rotors are probably going to be pretty worn, and the pads are probably going to be at the end of their life. So we'll take off the wheel and we'll inspect it, and we'll find out how shit they are. Alrighty, so I've just taken the wheel off to inspect the rear hub. The rotor doesn't actually look too bad. It is rusted out a fair bit, but that I'm not too worried about either way. That's going to come off regardless. The pads on this are, well, as you can tell, almost down to bare metal. So I'm glad I am doing this now. What we're gonna do first is we're gonna take off the spacers. Now, yes, I know I have spacers. I don't want them. The rear ones are not so bad, but the front ones are awful, and they keep breaking CVs, and my alignment's always out, but whatever. They need to be smaller. These rear ones can come off completely. I don't know if I'll leave them on for now, because otherwise it will look dumb with the offset, 2 different offsets. But I need to get smaller ones from the front, just because they don't clear the brakes, or the wheels don't clear the brakes. So that's a job for another day. Anyways, I'm going to take the spacer off, and then we're going to start disassembling the brake caliper. So essentially, I really did get the most life out of these pads, because like, yeah, they're like down to bare metal, which is insane. So luckily I'm replacing them, because it's pretty bad if you ask me. And the other one's exactly the same, just a tiny bit more life in that one, but I think regardless, these need to be replaced. I mean, these rotors are pretty corroded. The pads, I mean, the surface is not exactly very smooth. It's not very rough, but it could be better, so I'm glad I'm replacing these as well. Yeah, so hopefully we've got the right rotor. I'm going to double check that, but the pads, at least I know we've got the right ones, so I'm going to start taking off the rotor. So I've got the little plastic plate off of this. Make sure your handbrake is off before you do the rear rotors, because that will hold the rotors in place. Now, these don't come off that easy. You will need to use a hammer. I'd suggest using a rubber mallet, especially if you're putting the same rotors back on, but because these are going to the bin, it doesn't really matter. They will need a bit of force to come off. So. There we go. That's all you need to do. Tiny bit of force, and it all comes off. That's pretty much it. Then you get your brand new rotor, and you pop that on perfectly in place. Beautiful, just like that. So that's pretty simple. It's a pretty easy install, to be honest. To hold this in place, essentially you put that plastic piece back on, which is that. Mine's broken. It doesn't matter. It essentially does the same job. And that's it. That's literally all you need to do for a rotor install. Now what we'll do is we'll put the new pads in and assemble it. That's it. Alright, so the new rear rotors are in, new brake pads are in, as you can tell. That's all bolted up beautifully, ain't going nowhere. Time to put the wheel back on and do the other side. So to put the brake pads into the old brake caliper, you'll need something like this, as like a C-clamp or something similar to do the same job. So you will need to push the piston back so that the new pads will fit into this. Now, it's not really a hard job, it's not really that time consuming either if you've got the right tools and knowledge. And you got to make sure that these little clips don't fly out, because you will need them to hold the pad in place. This side's all done. I'm going to start getting around to the other side. I won't put the wheels back on just yet. Yeah, we'll get started on the other side.